Good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Randy Volokhovich, Chairman of the Senate Veterans and Affairs Emergency Preparedness Committee. I call this meeting of the SR6 Commission to order. I would ask all of you to please stand so we can do the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, we're getting close. Yesterday, a draft report was emailed out, and we're here today to review it. Pat Barrar and our team for the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee, along with our staff from the Senate and House Veterans Affairs and Emergency Preparedness Committees, have been working together to put everything into place. Now, there are light refreshments right outside the room there. We'll go until noon. If we're going to be a little bit longer than noon, then we'll break for lunch. And the good thing is the cafeteria is just right outside here. So we'll see how quickly we can get through it, but we want to go through it methodically. You guys put a lot of work into this, and we want to make sure that we go over everything. Nate, would you like to take the roll?
Senator Volokhovich.
Here.
Chairman Barrar.
Here.
Senator Costa.
Ron Jumper for Senator Costa.
Representative Sonato.
Michael Hillman for Representative Sonato.
Okay, Senator Brooks. We're going to try to hook up on the phone call here. And then for the Senate Fire Caucus, Senator Costa again, Ron Jumper. Representative Frank Ferry, we're going to try to hook up with the phone call as well. Representative Dom Costa. Fire Commissioner Bruce Trego. Dylan Ferguson.
Here.
Mark Hamilton. Peter Milan. Bill Rossi. Okay, John Kunzelman. Cheryl Barnhart. Steve Baer. Don Conkle.
Here.
James Carstater. Harold Weil. Ed Mann.
Here.
Bo Crowding.
Here.
Greg J. Kapowski or Tom Garrity. Art Mardonuska. Jay Delaney.
Present.
Joe Landis or Rich Wagner. Bill Genoway.
Here.
Frank Zangari.
Here.
Gerald Jones. John Bast. Dave Jones.
Here.
Don D. Ramus.
Here.
Barry Albertson. Jeff Gooch. Jerry Ozog.
Here.
Josh Wiegand. Kim Holman.
Here.
Chaz McGarvey.
Here.
Steve McInnes. Craig Nace.
Here.
That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. First, before I turn this over to Pat Barrar, I would like to just, Representative, do you have a few words to say?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm a politician, right? So, hey, thanks everyone for being here and for all your hard work that we put into this. I hope this meeting will pretty much wrap it up. I understand there could be a reason for another meeting sometime in November if we need to. We had as the last day of session, we did get a very important piece of this of the SR6 recommendations done. The Treat No Transport bill was passed unanimously, and it was great to see really a real cornerstone of this whole SR6 commission to get that done. Hopefully, that's a sign that going into next year, that within the first year, we'll get a lot of these pieces finished, and I'm looking forward to next year to really see how effective we can be in getting a lot of this legislation through the House. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. All right, Pat, it's all over to you now.
Okay, good morning. And I'd like to reiterate what was already said by the both chair. The work here is tremendous, and what I'm going to do now is walk you through the draft, which was the efforts of numerous folks, as you know. So I'll start first with the introduction. The introduction was written by Bill Genoway and Dave Jones. And then what we did was combine their two. They each did a piece on fire and on EMS, and then we combined it into one introduction. So that's the first piece. Actually, I apologize. The first piece, when you flip the cover, is the letter from the chairs. So that would be the first thing a reader is going to see, is the letter from the chairs. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to review it. But I'll move on. If you don't have questions, I will just continue to move on through the report. The second is the table of contents, and that's where I started with the introduction. The introduction reflects both issues related to fire and to EMS, and more or less introduces the reader to the issues that they're going to be seeing in the report. The next section is the Senate Resolution 6 Commission membership. And after the commission membership, we have the commission non-members and staff support listing. After that, we go to the executive summary. The executive summary was generally put together by Rick O'Leary. Thank you. And reflects similar to the SR6 report. It gives an overview, again, of the issues that the reader is going to be seeing in more detail in the recommendation sections. It does not reiterate the recommendations other than in a very broad manner. Sure.
If I may, our committee worked hard on trying to get true numbers of what the volunteer status is, or the firefighter status. And I know it talks about PFESI getting used a number from 300 to about 60,000 or fewer.
Right.
But, we had a pretty good number of about 38,000. I don't know why we wouldn't use that number that we received from the State Fire Commissioner's Office.
This was the number that was submitted. I am aware that we had that other number. We can certainly change it to that, to the number, the 37,000? 38,000?
I just think it's important that we reflect the truth.
Sure. And I think that was in the introduction. That's on page 1 of the introduction, correct? In the footnote on page 1, is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about something in the...
It's on page 14.
Okay, well, it's on page 1 also, so...
Let's see it there.
And page 14. Right. We can change those numbers.
Pat, one comment going back to your original page before we get too far into this.
Sure.
In my apologies, I just my experience through my past 40 years involved in doing all of this is never before in Pennsylvania has all the voices come together, and I think it's eloquently written. We are most pleased about that there was no divisions amongst fire and EMS, career and volunteer, municipal, first responder, all spoke with one voice. This is the first time that I recollect in my entire career that all voices came together. It seemed like the volunteer sector had their business, the career had their business, EMS had theirs. So whoever wrote this up and put all that in there and put bold, all, and underlined it, I think that's absolutely correct. This is historical in Pennsylvania, that all the voices really came together. There was no haggling, there was no fighting, there was good discussion, robust discussion at time, but whoever put that in there, I think that says a lot about this entire committee. Just wanted to offer that.
I have one quick comment, and I support Janice's recommendation to put the 38,000 in there. I think leaving the mid number in there of 300,000 is important, so we can see that the decline has been precipitous, but it's also continuing.
Sure.
When people look at that, it's important that they understand that it continues.
Keep the 60 in.
Yeah,
Get
the,
the 60 in, yeah.
300 to 60 to today, we're at 38. I agree.
so 300,000 to 60,000 to 38,000. Okay. Any other comments regarding the executive summary? From the executive
I'm sorry, on the second paragraph, the,
page,
on the executive summary, the first page, it indicates that we have an Office of EMS. That's technically, it's actually Bureau of EMS.
any other comments on the executive summary? So we start with recommendation 1. If you all have this sheet that was handed out today, this crosswalks the recommendations in this draft with the recommendations that you approved at our meeting in September. So what you'll see is on the left-hand side of the page, that's the current recommendation number. On the right-hand side of the page, that corresponds now to, in some cases, more than one of the recommendations that was adopted on September 19th. As you recall from that meeting, there were several recommendations that really were the same. For example, the sprinklers recommendation. So what we did when we were putting the recommendations together is we tried to pull the ones that were more or less the same recommendation into a single recommendation. That said, it is all crosswalked, and what was in the recommendations from September 19th are reflected in these recommendations. The other thing that may have happened here, some of the language may be slightly different. What we tried to do is have a consistent language throughout the report and consistent formatting throughout the report. So if you may have used numbers and in here it now has bullets. You may have had a chart and here the information was pulled out of the chart and turned into bullets. So it may not look exactly like the recommendation that was voted on looked like, but the language and the actual recommendation is the same. So starting with, the other thing that we did, and again, this is more like the readability of the report, was to take them out of the order they were in. If you recall, when we met back in September, I think we started with the recruiting and retention, and then we went into government support and each of the subcommittees. What we did here, though, is we looked at the subject matter of each of the recommendations and then loosely grouped them and started with those recommendations regarding the reduction in the number of staff, because that seemed to be one of the key themes throughout all of our meetings. So the first few recommendations really have to do with the fact that there's a decline in the number of staff and we need to grow that and retain and recruit. Then we go into some recommendations that had to do more with structural needs, like the Office of State Fire Commissioner, regionalization, and those kinds. So you'll see several recommendations that hit those topics. Then we move into laws and regulations, where there are recommendations, for example, a review of the EMS laws. So then those come up. Then we hit the big funding piece, and that is funding in general as well as VLAP and the relief associations. Then it's support and training, and then it's kind of a catch-all, and that's the sprinklers, the fire suppressants, the right-to-know laws is in there. Things that didn't quite fit in the other categories, although we can always move things around. And then the final one that I thought made sense as kind of our summative statement was the continuing involvement of the stakeholders in ongoing efforts. So the last actual recommendation in the report is a recommendation that says continue to involve all the stakeholders as you move forward. So that's the, I'll say, the lay of the land of the recommendations, so we can start walking through those. The first recommendation, the new number 1, is the old recruiting and retention 1 and 2. And it talks about the reduction in the number of fire and EMS personnel. We moved a cafeteria plan concept into this, and it became Exhibit 1 for the report.
Two comments of clarification.
Sure.
On the title of the recommendation, should it be halt or stop reduction of fire and EMS personnel? To me, if it's recommendation and it says to reduce the number, it just doesn't sound like we're
Sure.
doing the proactive. It sounds like
For purposes of this, we had used whatever was the title on it, but that's an excellent point.
yeah, I understand I'm wrong in giving you that title.
No, no, that's fine. We can do that with the titles, and that would make...
Yeah, the other comment that I would have, the 5th bullet up from the bottom, again, if I put tech training in, there should be VOTEC training.
Okay.
On career technical education, because
That's the modern,
day career technical education.
Career and technical? Technical education training.
Correct.
So on the second page, page 17 of this, the recruitment tool, we have a website already for EMS. It needs to be updated. We have that already. Included on that form.
You're going to have to tell me exactly where you're...
Develop a single statewide recruiting tool, video, PSA ad, and website.
On the second page.
No, I see it. What do you want it to say? Is this what we...
Oh, that's a hypothetical.
Oh, that's hypothetical?
Yes.
No one has anything like that? Okay. So then it should say both because the website for EMS is not functional anymore. Needs funding.
Although I think the aspect, though, of the underlying premise of the recommendation was to not have separate websites, but to have, I think that was a recommendation from that group, was to have one unified website for fire and EMS across the Commonwealth, rather than having two separate. So I don't know if by adding something, if that's actually detracting from what the underlying intent was for that recommendation. But I think that we're all clear that there's no specific language, there's no specific website, there's no specific aspect as to what has been decided of how to, if at all, to move forward with that.
So it's going to remain as is, or?
As long as we have a chance to put content out there that reflects what...
No, absolutely. And that doesn't necessarily reflect my position. That just reflects my understanding of what that group put forward. I mean, am I understanding that correctly?
You're absolutely right, and I think the best example is we already have a fire one, which is not referenced there specifically for that purpose. So this would be a new one. Frankly, if we want to take out the hypothetical, we could do that too, if that's makes it simple.
Just strike the specific website language.
Any other comments on recommendation 1? Recommendation 2 in the current, sorry.
In regards to alternate funding for fire service and EMS training in high school and community colleges, we'll make sure we add ETAs under the State Fire Academy. That's the county agencies that are doing safety training under the State Fire Academy that they're able to receive funding as well. So the educational training.
Are we adding a recommendation or a clarification?
We're adding, in addition to high school and community college, we need to make sure that educational training moves under the State Fire Academy that's providing fire training are included in that funding bill. Versus anything else you want to expand on that, I saw that shake off, but I think that.
Yeah, I agree, that's a support function we have. I agree, Bo. It's a support function that we use other than the community colleges. And obviously, they would be very important in the delivery.
And I guess just a comment from the EMS side here as well, given the educational training institutes are doing key training. We need to figure out the exact wording on that, so everybody that's providing that training, even at the local level, that's doing key training, paramedic training, firefighter 1, firefighter 2, anything under those groups, needs to be able to, not just the high school, but the community college.
And I think we can move to add the ETAs for the fire side and the educational training institutes on the EMS side. And I don't really think that I don't think that that's changing a recommendation or making a new recommendation. Rather, I think it's just ensuring that the full intent of that recommendation is made clear in the report. As I feel that the fundamental underlying reason for that was to ensure that emergency services education across the Commonwealth was adequately funded. I don't think that anybody had any preconceived notions that it should only go to these organizations. It's just those are the organizations which do a lot of the training, but as we're all aware, they do not all of it.
Yeah, just a clarification.
Can that's fine. Can somebody provide language to me at the end of the meeting?
I can certainly put
That would
something
be
together
great.
for you. That will be a problem.
Okay, thank you.
So page 17,
Hey, I would ask all of you, when you have the mic, you need to pull it a little closer to you, make sure the green light's on. Pull the mic closer to you so everybody can hear loud and clear and we get a good take on the camera, okay? All right.
Are we ready to move on to recommendation 2? And this is actually the prior recruiting and retention XXX recommendation. And to respond to the earlier comment about Bill's comment regarding the title, this could be need for recruitment and retention training?
I'm okay with that particular title, it's just, we need to do recruitment and retention planning.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, recommendation 3. Recommendation 3 is the prior government support recommendation 2. And again, we may need to rework the title here to, I don't know, maybe government responsibility to halt volunteer firefighter decline, or need for government support to address volunteer firefighter decline.
I think it's more than that, Pat. That's why we left it at government responsibility, because it looks into background investigations, it looks into a
Right.
couple different things. It's not just recruiting volunteers. So I think it's a responsibility of the local government or you know, county or state even.
Acceptance of responsibility by local government, need for additional involvement of local government. Need for additional government support for, yeah. Need for additional government support?
Place the entire title.
I think I think it's important to have the word responsibility in there, because I think governments need to start taking responsibility. They're in charge of providing fire and EMS, but from what we got from some of our members, a lot of local governments don't meet with them.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we show that they have responsibility and that the title states responsibility on their part.
How about enhanced or expanded responsibility, government responsibility
Okay.
for fire and EMS?
For fire and EMS?
And Pat, I'm not sure what that. I'm not sure what the final title was, but I think removing volunteer would be a good suggestion as well.
Yeah.
Okay, enhanced government responsibility for fire and EMS services or emergency services?
And maybe provision, put the word provision of emergency services or something like that.
Enhanced government responsibility for provision of emergency services?
And I would think wherever in this document we use the term firefighter, excuse me, and we're talking about both firefighters and EMS personnel, is we go with a more generic term, because otherwise you're going to get people to just read right over that section. If they think it doesn't apply to them, they're not going to even look at it. So if we could go with a generic term instead of just firefighter, that, emergency service personnel, something like that.
Emergency service personnel?
It's a lot broader.
Let's watch our emergency service personnel, because we have some municipalities that think plowing snow is emergency services. So maybe we should be talking about first responders for this comment.
Okay.
Do we want to use first
That would be fine.
responders?
That would be fine.
If we use the first responders, should we not somewhere where appropriate? They mentioned sometimes where when we use the word first responders, we're referring to volunteer fire, professional, or full-time firefighters, EMS, those types of things. So we quantify what that means.
I was going to say, would there be a possibility to just define the term first responder somewhere, either in the introduction or the executive summary,
That's
that
what I
says,
was
for the
thinking.
purposes of this report,
Yeah.
first
Yep.
responder shall be defined as a firefighter of any type and a certified emergency medical services provider at any level, or something to that effect.
We're clear on what that first responders means.
Right, I would say a career volunteer, only because as part of our, part of the responsibility of this committee was to try and define what a firefighter is in this state, because we don't have a definition. So I would,
Just for a conversation, what comes out of your mouth usually is volunteer fire and professional firefighters. There's really,
firefighter.
yeah, so,
Yeah, I-
so it should just be firefighters, right?
Absolutely, Senator. Get rid of this volunteer and careers. Say firefighter. We're all doing the same job.
We're all together.
Yes.
We don't need to do anything else and go backwards. We need to start using the term appropriately. And I have to say, the word came out of my mind was when I brought this up with professional firefighters, and yet I know with the training and everything else and bring it all together. So I think we need to somehow address that.
Sure.
Yeah, and Senator, and I will follow up on that. My good friend from Schuylkill County, he's a professional firefighter, but he's a volunteer chief. So professional doesn't mean anything. We use the term career or volunteer, but as I said from the beginning, we all bleed the same color. It matters with education and experience. They're the two things. It doesn't matter whether you're paid or not. Just point of clarification. And one other thing to add, I think we need to be careful, though, if we talk about first responders, because police departments are across the United States. When you talk first responders, it's police, fire, and EMS. So I just don't know how far we want to go towards that term of first responder.
And I think that's why if we use that generic of a term, I think that's why it's important to be defined as such, defined as firefighters and emergency medical services providers, and make that delineation as clear as we possibly can. Going back to the name discussion regarding firefighters, I just think that it's important that regardless of paid versus volunteer, to recognize that they're all professional firefighters. And I think that that's just really important. So we all want to be careful with that language of using the term professional, because I think we would all agree that our first responders across the Commonwealth, including law enforcement, are certainly all professionals.
What?
I just caution if we use the term certified personnel that we may end up accidentally excluding people that are in a process. If the legislation says it only applies to certified personnel, if we have somebody who's going through the process, we don't want to exclude that person as well.
So you could use recognize, or you could just use EMS providers in general.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I would just like to clarify, as we mentioned firefighter, but then where we are with first responders, we cannot also forget the fire police officers, because we don't want to just say firefighters. That's where I think it's important where we define this is what is the first responder, but then as the EMS folks, the firefighter, but then our fire police also play a very important role as a first responder, our hazmat, hazardous materials folks. So we just have to make sure we get that right so we don't exclude anybody, or somebody could come back and say that. But then I also understood what Jay said with, a police officer, but we're all first responders, but we have to make sure we don't forget anybody, that somebody down the road could say, well, we weren't included in that, or so.
You could also add a statement to that, though, that says, this definition is to be liberally and broadly construed across the fire and emergency medical services. And I think that you put language in that like that of that liberally and broadly construed. That would cover the fire police, that could cover your hazardous materials, because if we went through and we just tried to bullet point every single type of emergency services provider, minus snowplow drivers and law enforcement officers, I mean, we know that list could get pretty long pretty quickly, I would think.
Mr. Chairman, I've been dealing with this for a while, and for the sake of this report and any legislation that comes out of it, I think it's best just to refer to who we're talking about in a generic term as a firefighter and EMS provider. When you look at trying to define terms, if you leave something out, it's not included, and that's the risk you take. Speaking to fire police, under our law, a fire policeman have to be a firefighter. So as being recognized in statute, you have to be a firefighter in order to be a fire policeman. So I don't think we need to twist ourselves into a pretzel. We know who a firefighter is, and we know who an EMS provider is. And I don't think we need to worry about using first responder or anything else.
There's also this conflict of L&I, SWIFT, regarding people who do other types of work at these fire stations. Even EMS, where if they get hurt, they're not covered. We haven't worked that all out yet. So I think John has a good point there. But I think as far as and we have to be clear what we want here. So if somebody has the language, you need to get it done and get it to tap, because she wants to accommodate what we're talking about here. So need to be a little bit conscious of the fact that she's trying to put in there our concerns. So we've got to be pretty sure what we're giving her expresses that. All right? So a definition, and I think when we talk about the first responders, using that term, we talk about police being first responders. It's relative to the study of this commission. The study of this commission was not about police. It was about fire and EMS. So somehow that could be worded like that relative to the work of the SR6 commission. This first responders means the following. However you would write that.
And we can put that in the summary for the read. Now, I just want to clarify, we're only going to use the term first responders when we're talking about some recommendation or issue here that involves both parties, because in some cases we have very detailed recommendations that deal specifically with EMS or specifically with fire. So it's going to be a matter of identifying those areas where it really is a more, I'll say, generic recommendation. Okay. Okay, that was anything else regarding recommendation 3? Okay. Recommendation 4 was the prior EMS 4. And again, it just says EMS personnel. We'd probably want to add some type of language there about need to address the decline in EMS personnel or decline in numbers or something along those lines. Any comments? Okay. Recommendation 5 is Government Support Recommendation 1, which is the Office of the State Fire Commissioner, creation of statewide fire commission, which, again, maybe the title needs to be adjusted to need for an Office of State Fire Commission, need for additional authorities for the state fire commissioner and creation of the state fire commission, something along those lines. Does anyone have specific suggestion?
I just have a question. What is the main difference between office and bureau? We had it brought up about the Bureau of EMS versus Office of EMS. Would there be a distinction, Commissioner, with office versus bureau? I mean, is there?
So in terms of the discussion of office versus bureau, it really relates to the level of an organizational unit within a state department. So a bureau is, pardon the expression, but a little bit higher in the pecking order rather than an office. Typically, a bureau is reporting, at least within Department of Health, is reporting directly to a deputy secretary, whereas an office is kind of, sometimes it's just a separate offshoot. It may have some divisional structure. So it really is just relating to how important a function is and what type of scope it is and where it fits within the organizational chart. EMS has gone from, in Pennsylvania, has really gone from a division, which is usually housed within a bureau, to its separate offshoot of an office, because it's like, okay, well, you don't really fit within this one, so you're going to be over here, before ultimately, in terms of the last time that these issues were discussed, being elevated to a place of prominence as a bureau within the Department of Health.
Senator, if I may.
Yes.
A history lesson on the Fire Commissioner's office. When it was originally founded in the mid-'70s, there was a one-person shop, and there only was a fire commissioner, and his original office was actually a broom closet under one of the stair towers in the Capitol building, and that's not a joke, that's the actual truth. Eventually, things moved from the Department of Education, where the Fire Academy fell, to the Fire Commissioner. The loan program at one time was at the Department of Community Affairs, and it eventually moved to the Fire Commissioner's office. And then during the Casey administration, eventually the Fire Commissioner's office ended up in Pima. During the Casey administration, there was an outcry from the fire service because they felt the Fire Commissioner was no longer independent, that he was nothing more than a mouthpiece for the Pima director. And the fire service did not like the way they were being treated. Everything was, it's this way or no way. And during the first Ridge campaign, it became a very big part of the Ridge campaign when he ran for office the first time. And the promise was made to the fire service, if I'm elected, it'll change. And that's when the law changed again that created, quote unquote, the independent office of the state fire commissioner. Rick was probably around when that language was written. And the law made it clear that the fire commissioner reported to the governor through the lieutenant governor on all matters related to fire service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then one other time in recent years, it was amended even further to make it ultimately clear that the fire commissioner did not report to the Pima director, that the fire commissioner reported to the governor through the lieutenant governor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the title office of state fire commissioner goes back into the 70s when the office was created, and it was an office of one person. For the first couple of years, the office even existed. So just a history lesson, if you will.
And I think for now, maybe office is appropriate. It is the office, and I think everybody understands what its role is. And if we're writing legislation to do all these other things at some point, we could discuss at the time whether it needs to be a title change. But I think for the report, office is fine.
So keep it the way it is?
That's my recommendation.
Okay.
But does everyone agree that we need to do something with the title to maybe create a commission or enhance the responsibilities or something along those lines?
A comment on the titles throughout. I recommend that
Thanks, Mike.
that we mentally preface each one of these titles with "we recommend that," or we recommend the. So in our minds, we think we recommend the, and then we state what it is that we recommend, right? So creation of would be the way to start. We recommend the creation of a statewide fire commission / reorganization of the office, of the state fire commissioner. Then we would be consistent throughout if we keep thinking we recommend the, just a suggestion.
But without actually including the words we recommend in the report. Okay, thank you. Okay, we are up to recommendation 6, and this is equivalent to innovation 3. And it's support for regional or county fire EMS services. And that was actually touched on in a couple of different recommendations, and it may still be there, but this is the primary one that deals with the idea of regionalizing.
I have just a formatting question. I'm assuming because there are multiple fonts through the document that that'll get cleaned up in the edit process. As this looks to be about 6-point font.
The actual report it's Times New Roman 12 for the body. It's Times New Roman 16 for the headers.
Okay.
Okay, no comments, then.
Just one comment. I think the reference to the Philadelphia Fire Commissioner
I would agree. I don't
probably dates the report pretty quickly. I mean, I don't think Adam's going anywhere this week, but 3 years from now, that may be a different situation. So I think we can find resources as necessary without actually recommending Adam. That's about halfway down under
Should we
problem
just,
statement.
no, I see where it is. Should we just stop after the link
I would.
and delete the
Yeah,
rest of
I
that?
think.
That's fine. Recommendation 7 was innovation 5. And in back, we're looking at technical advisors. Any comments?
I don't know if you can include it in here, but as a point of reference, the House Resolution 148 report, the Legislative Budget and Finance put out, God knows how many years ago now, would be a good point of reference in here if people want to go back and look for suggestions that were made on the regionalization when that report was issued. There were tons of excellent recommendations in that report.
I was going to see if it's in the references section. I just frankly don't remember everything that got listed there.
I guess if there's any way you can reference the House resolution within recommendation 7.
Was that the one from 2005?
That would be
believe
close.
it was.
Then it is referenced. It's referenced. It's not referenced as the Resolution 148, but it's referenced as the report in Appendix 6, which is the reports and references document. So it is in the report.
Okay.
That's it because it came out after SR 6.
Yep.
because they waited until we finished SR6
Yep.
to include it.
And then kind of included some of the same things. Okay, so recommendation 7, no comments. Recommendation 8, which was the prior Regulations and Codes 1, and that's the review and revision of EMS Act. Now, for example, this would remain EMS versus first responders, since we're talking specifically about the EMS Act. No comments. Recommendation 9, which is the prior Regulations and Codes 9. Isn't that nice that it lined up that way? And this has to do with, again, laws and regulations related to volunteer firefighter relief associations to be reviewed. Any comments? I'll move on to 10, which was government support for 5 and regulations and codes 8. And that has to do with VLAP. We had several recommendations that covered this topic, so what we tried to do was include all of them in this one, give the overview of what VLAP was, and then the recommendations throughout, and tried to include everything that was recommended. We also have, I think, another VLAP recommendation later. Any comments?
Under the problem statement, it says in 2104. I would assume that should be 2014.
Good catch, thank you.
The other thing, right, most of the career fire or career fire departments, I don't know of any career fire companies. So if we're going to use career, I'd change that to.
Sure, where can you?
In the title.
Do you want that changed throughout? Because I'm noticing it where it says volunteer fire companies again.
Volunteers are normally fire companies because they're tax exempt and those kinds of things, where career fire departments are usually a part of the local municipality or city or something.
So for career, we should have department. For volunteer, we should have company.
I would think
Is
so,
that correct?
yes.
Okay.
Chaz, should that just say amend VLAP and then include the recommendations? So somebody doesn't look at the title and say, okay, that covers VLAP?
Yeah, and also, we must understand with this, even though it says to include career departments, there's only about a dozen fully career departments. 50% of what we think are career departments are technically combination fire departments, which are volunteer and career mixed. So I'm not sure, but this, when we look to say to amend for career fire departments, understand, Chaz is a career chief, but he has mostly volunteer firefighters that he supervises. So I think it's okay, but I think it should be changed to career fire departments. And Don, what was your second half?
Well, I just thought, looking at the title, if I'm paging through the report, I think that covers everything that we want to do with VLAP, and that might be, people might not read on. If we just got rid of career fire departments and it says amend VLAP, and then in the problem statement and the recommendations, we make the recommendations to include them, I think just clarifies what that section says.
Yeah, and maybe you just amend VLAP to FALAP, like we have as in the recommendations.
That's fine. I mean, that's...
Like it's down in the resolution.
So you're looking at the title to say amend VLAP
To FALAP, F-A-L-A-P.
to, and take out include career fire departments from the title.
Right.
Okay.
Be careful using just fire agency, because EMS organizations are able to apply to the 2% loan as well.
Okay, so.
The idea is we want to include the two governments, in
I don't think renaming it is near as important in this document as it is.
Exactly.
The point.
The renaming will occur when the legislation is
Let's get the
enacted.
career organizations included in the program. That's the point of this. It's not so much what the name of it's going to be. I don't care what you call it down the road. The point of this recommendation is to get the career organizations included in the VLAP program.
Yes.
What we currently know as the VLAP program, and attempt to get the money that was taken from the program restored to the program. That was the intent of this recommendation.
Correct.
Yeah, it's, several changes are going to be needed in that law, to fit that mission. So I don't think we have to spell out every, A, B, C, D, E, step of what we're doing here. It would be that in the legislation. So.
And there is one third important aspect to this too. It's to relook at the program because it's built on a model from the 1980s. You can't, the program doesn't work for today's fire engines that are $500,000 to $1 million and a ladder truck that's 1.2, 1.3. So that's what some of the language is about here also.
It's a good time to give it a healthy gut check. It really is.
Yeah.
So do we go with the amend VLAP to include career fire departments, or do we want to change that language?
Well, I think all others are already included. I mean,
No, that's fine. I'm just trying to clarify what we've done with the title.
I think just change fire companies to fire departments, and I think we're good.
Okay. Then recommendation 11 is the prior EMS 3, and this has to do with EMS relief associations.
Has anybody been able to clarify with the Auditor General's office why all of a sudden they decided to take a look at, everything was fine. So is it one auditor that took a look at the current regulation and said, nah, this can't be? What changed in the Auditor General's office that everything was okay and now it's a problem? Does anybody know?
There were 18 of them that we are aware of. We were given the list. I don't know exactly what transpired, but I know the reasoning. And the reasoning was given that in order for you to receive that, you have to be affiliated with a fire company. So if you're an EMS company and you're not affiliated, or actually it doesn't have to do with the organization, it has to do with your personnel. So if you're an EMS provider, but you volunteer for a fire company, then relief monies can be used for you. But you cannot give the relief money to the EMS organization because they are not a volunteer fire company, and that's according to the statute.
Well, but if they're using the term affiliated, I can think of any number of areas in the Commonwealth where an ambulance service may be standalone, but every time the fire department goes out, that local ambulance service is there providing rehab services or in a lot of cases, free of charge, an emergency standby on behalf of the fire department at the fire call. So if something happens to a firefighter, they have immediate access to EMS. So I guess maybe it depends on how you define the term affiliated.
Well, operationally, you're correct, but from a statutory standpoint, it's not true. If you go back and you remember, EMS companies used to be part of a fire company, so they were all one unit and considered volunteer firefighters. Now that they've gotten separate over the years, that has changed the paradigm. But again, you can't ignore that provision where it says you have to be, number one, you have to be affiliated. Number two, if you look at that act in its entirety, it has to do with the individual and not the organization, so that the monies can be used for the individual purpose and not the organization. So you have to be a volunteer firefighter, and you have to be acting as a volunteer firefighter.
Okay, so this kind of goes with the next recommendation, recommendation 12, which is relief associations. Maybe it's time, as Rick said, it's time to do a gut check on Act 84, Firemen's Relief Associations altogether, and bring it up to speed with what's going on in our environment today.
I agree with you.
I would just offer that in my case, in my municipality, we had a letter from the Relief Association or from the Auditor General's office indicating that our EMS provider was authorized to receive money,
and then the interpretation by the specific auditor who came out said, no, you can't get this money anymore, and you're going to have to repay it, and then we had to go back and negotiate it. So it was clearly an interpretation issue on the part of either somebody in policy or someone out in the field.
And let's not forget that it's the responsibility of the municipality to certify who their relief association is that they're giving the money to.
Yeah, we did that by ordinance, and it still wasn't good enough for the auditor.
Anything else on recommendation 11? I don't have any specific changes noted to it. Recommendation 12, which was the prior innovation 6, and again deals with relief associations. Any comments? Okay, recommendation 13, which is prior government support 3. And again, deals with the decline in relief revenues.
Just one case in point, Steve Barrar, who is the state college fire chief, really uncovered a lot of the language that's in here. And if the Commonwealth is looking to enhance dollars and cents to fire and EMS, or at least fire, this has to be investigated, this has to be looked at. This could be big money, big monies that we're losing. Just want to make a case in point that this is a lot of value to dollars and cents to the emergency response community.
To the members of the General Assembly and their staff, Relief Association money across the state is down by about 30%. And I know Representative Ferry had made comment at our last meeting that they felt there's a loophole somewhere, that the foreign fire insurance companies are taking advantage of a loophole. Is there any more word on what's happening with that?
Yeah, what I'd like to do, I was just talking to Rick about, we were hoping we would have time this legislative session for a hearing on that, and we haven't, time just hasn't been on our side. What I'd like to do is to talk to the 4 chairmen involved and send a letter to the insurance commissioner and to the auditor general to start getting them, because there's about a 2-month lull in the legislature here after election, and ask them to start looking into this. Maybe we'll have some kind of a response from them before the legislature comes back in January. Then we can do a hearing, hopefully. Hopefully we can find I can't imagine that it's a impossible problem to fix. It's just going to take some enforcement. The people that have enforcement power in this is the insurance commissioner. So we have to, but first we have to get our facts together of why it's happening.
I would also offer, as you're doing that investigation, not to forget the self-insurance programs that exist, because many corporations have done the McDonald's model, where they have a separate corporation that owns all of their properties. They then self-insure those properties, and that money is invested in Bermuda or London or someplace else. And as a result, we never see that, and the money's gone away from those foreign fire insurance companies.
You okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. We'll work on a letter with the Senate and then the House and get it out to the insurance commissioner.
Sir, one comment on that. I've been receiving a lot of complaints, obviously, about the fireman's relief. And it was brought to my attention that some of the issue they are claiming is they're writing higher casualty insurance policies and lower fire policies. I don't know whether that's true. That's just a claim that has come across my desk.
And that probably is best to be investigated by the insurance commissioner's office.
Call.
I do know that Chief Bear has reached out to someone, and there's an upcoming meeting regarding this too, so we'll keep you apprised of that as well.
Pat, one other point, me again. And reading through this, I'm seeing references to this tax, but it's never stated what tax we're discussing. I think everyone in the room knows, but it's not said here.
If you can tell me the tax.
Okay, well, everyone in the room except me, I was trying to bluff there.
The document I was working off of didn't have it, so. Somebody wants to provide the formal name of the tax to me?
And so then the recommendation title should probably reflect,
Foreign lead. Okay. Okay, if you can provide the citation for it or whatever that we want to put in here. Great, thank you. Okay, recommendation 14, which was the prior EMS 1. That has to do with EMS funding. Any comments? No? Okay, recommendation 15. Once again, it's EMS agency funding challenges, and that was EMS 2. And this has to do with the non-transport outcomes, which was mentioned earlier by Representative Barrar.
Just passing the legislation isn't going to stop the problem. We're really going to have to, again, stay on top of the insurance industry to, as far as enforcement goes. We passed the legislation doesn't mean that the insurance industry is going to comply. I can name a half a dozen other things that the insurance doesn't do without somebody putting pressure on them to live up to the obligation. So again, we need to get feedback from you that what's going on and how successful you are getting reimbursed for this treat no transport system that'll be in place soon. Thank you.
Okay, recommendation 16 was prior innovation 4, and this is municipal support and education regarding fire and EMS. And this, and again, the title will need to be adjusted, but this has to do with ensuring that local governments understand the needs and understand what services are being provided. Any comments? Okay, recommendation 17, which was prior regulations and codes 2. This is just a communication recommendation.
I just have one question about it. If we only use this terminology, do we exclude the opportunities to bring military firefighters or career firefighters who go through some type of an academy but do not get the NFPA 1001 certification? So, which I know the apprentice program in some communities still exists, I believe. So do we put professional certification or somewhere in there, do we put or equivalent? Because I know that the military...
Are you on recommendation 17 or 18?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought we were on 18.
No, we're
My
on
bad.
17.
My bad. No wonder you all looking funny at me.
Okay.
17 looks pretty good.
17's okay.
Okay, so now we're on to recommendation 18.
Okay,
And
now you don't have to look as funny at me, Frank.
Recommendation 18 is the prior training and operations 1. And Bill, you had comments?
Well, it says desirable on the second page. I'm just wondering, and I'm just looking for input here, because I know that we've had it in my department, and I know all the ones around us where they've had a military facility and you have firefighters that are trained and are quite competent. Do we exclude them if we don't somehow recognize that capability or alternative? That's my only question here.
I think typically anymore, if anybody goes through the military fire schools, they leave certified at firefighter 2. And some, I don't know about all the military branches, but I know with the Air Force, in order to get promotions anymore, you have to reach certain levels of certification tied to your next promotion. But does it hurt to include DOD under desirable training and certification? No.
And I agree with that. And then also, as we drill down into this further, as we, after we get through this, and as we talked about a lot of things earlier, defining all that, but, our big motivation point from the training and operations group is we have to start somewhere and have a foundation, but we definitely have to look at all those other equivalents and stuff like that. So I agree, we definitely need
to include that, but.
So if I understood correctly, on page 43, we're going to add an additional bullet point that would say Department of Defense firefighter training? Or is that
That's fine.
firefighter and emergency medical
No, that's fine.
services? Or is it just firefighter?
DOD firefighter training, I believe it includes EMS to some level.
Okay.
I'm not sure what level, but.
So I'm going to ask a procedural question here. That wasn't part of what was adopted at the September 19th meeting. Do we need to take a vote on that since we're adding?
I think if we vote on that at the final session, that blesses it. If, you know, the final report, if we pass that, if it's in there, I'm not sure we even have a quorum today, I don't know.
So what are you saying, Don? Add it here and then we vote on it during the final meeting?
Yeah.
One question. If you put the Department of Defense on there, you're talking the federal level. So what about people who are trained in the National Guard that do the same type of things? The National Guard, I think at the 171st in Pittsburgh, I think you have a firefighting unit there.
All of National Guard, Army, or Reserve, active duty are all going to go to the Air Force Fire School at Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas. Regardless what branch of service you're in, if you're going to be a firefighter in that branch of the military, you're going to is it Shepherd or Goodfellow? Goodfellow for fire school.
Okay.
And when you leave there, you're going to leave certified through the International Fire Service Accreditation Congress, or IFSAC, at least firefighter 1, hazmat ops, and I believe even as an EMT by the Department of Defense. So whether you're in the National Guard or if you're in a National Guard unit and you're going to be a firefighter in a National Guard unit, eventually you're going to end up at the DOD Fire School. And in order to complete that fire school, you're going to leave there with those certifications through the International Fire Service of Accreditation, through IFSAC.
I think we're good with the. I think we're good with the language here because I think all of those services has adopted NFPA.
But you have a cadre of people who, I don't want to call them their legacy, but they are.
Is NFPA the correct terminology? No. Because they're whole separate codes. I don't know we want NFPA firefighter service.
Should be national.
National, yeah. Commissioner, am I correct? NFPA should be in there for certification. That's a whole different set of code books. And I know the military follows NFPA certification.
If you want to leave NFPA in there, you could do it, but you would want to address that is the standard to which they are accredited or certified. But I'm okay. I would suggest national professional certification. And you could even put in parentheses either IFSAC or Pro Board. Because those are the only two that I know of that I'm aware of.
There aren't any others. I'd agree. I think it's only DOD who's NFPA.
As far as other training in other states, we do have a mechanism for them to get equivalents now through Act 46. So, you know, and we do that for folks from out of state, so that's covered. In regards to equivalents, now certification is totally different. They're gonna need to follow the certification process to do that.
Why can't we just add the comment or equivalent, like Dr. Genoway said at the beginning, period?
Where exactly do you
At the
want-
very first comment where it says NFPA Firefighter 1 certification or equivalent. We're beating this to death, I'm telling you. Or equivalent.
My only thing, Frank, is NFPA is the.
No, national part has to change. You're right.
It should be. I mean, NFPA is the lesser of the two, I would think.
Yeah, how about if it's in that line of NFPA Firefighter 1 certification, parentheses, or equivalent National Professional Fire Service Qualifications Board criteria?
National, can you?
Bruce will write it for you.
Sure. You're writing it for me. Right there. Okay. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so that was recommendation 18. Recommendation 19 is the former Innovation 2, and this has to do with basic firefighting EMS training funding, and based on our earlier conversation, then this would change to basic first responder funding, since we're talking about all the groups that are covered by this report. Any comments or questions?
One comment, and we talk about chasing the volunteer sector away from emergency services. We did it ourselves. So at one time, it cost $25 for an EMT class. Now it's $1,000. So if there's one way we want to allow the volunteer sector to grow again, it's to give them affordable training. And we chased them away, at least from the EMT's perspective, in my opinion.
Any other comments? So recommendation 20, which is prior innovation 7, and this is the business tax credit. And again, we would broaden this to first responders. Now, I've got a question to the group. That the last statement under resolution is statute, regulation, policy necessary to provide tax incentives for employers to permit employees time off to attend basic fire/EMT training. Do we retain fire/EMT training or change it to first responder training? And I'm just asking for guidance here in how to amend this document.
I think first responder training would be fine.
So, okay.
Pat, are we going to, we're probably going to have to, the first responder is going to have to be inserted in a lot of places,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'm just, where I happen to see
Yeah.
it specifically, I'm making a comment on it. But yeah,
Okay.
we're going to have to go through this. Okay, any other comments on recommendation 20? Okay, recommendation 21, which is the prior regulations and code 7. And this is reinstating FTE funding.
And Pat, again, that should include the ETAs for the funding.
I think it says at the bottom, additionally, funding should be provided to county-operated emergency services training centers that provide state-approved training to fire and EMS personnel.
You're ahead of me, Ed.
I added that because Bo asked me to add it 5 months ago.
Okay.
He said,
That's fine
don't
then.
forget about the county fire school, so that's why that's it.
And does anybody know the exact year here? At the very beginning, it says during the Rendell administration, exact year.
I believe it's 2005.
What's that?
2005.
I was there, but I don't remember the year. I just know that it happened.
If it's 2005, I'd recommend we just say in 2005, the funding formula was changed rather than include the administration.
Right.
Joe Schmieder was the bureau director at EMS at the time, so that's how far back it went.
Pat, just a real quick note on that, the ETA centers as well, the private training institutes as well, just because on the EMS side, that's...
And I know I'm rewriting the language for recommendation 1, and the general language, I think, just needs to be organizations that provide fire, EMS, or in this case,
Training.
first responder education as approved by the state. So that, you know, there has to be something tied to it that covers Educational Training Institute, that covers the educational training agencies, it covers the high schools, it covers the community
Perfect.
colleges, it
Perfect.
covers everything.
I trust you, Dylan.
So the language that you're going to provide would also get inserted here on page 46.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, any other comments regarding recommendation 21? So on to recommendation 22, which is a Synodo recommendation 1, and has to do with emergency responder mental wellness and stress management. Any comments? Recommendation 23, that was prior innovation 1 and regulations in code 6. This is the sprinkler requirements recommendation, and we tried to capture the language of both of those recommendations as well as the language in the individual recommendations that were voted on. Comments? So recommendation 24, this is fireworks. This is prior regulations and codes 5. And we did add the language here that had to do with allowing the local government authority, which was similar to the language that was in the sprinkler. If you recall, we talked about that language, and it was recommended that it be included here also. No comments?
I just put 2018 there and 24. It says during July 4th of this year.
2000. Okay. Recommendation 25 is prior regulations and codes 4. And that's the certification for individuals who install and service fire extinguishers.
I would also add and fire suppression systems, because that's a big part of it.
That's in the issue, but you would like that added to the title?
Yeah, they're two separate
Okay.
certifications.
Chief, will that cover it all? I think they were also talking about alarm systems.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah.
I don't know how we,
Well, systems would imply both alarm and sprinkler system. I think that's,
So just use the word systems?
yeah.
well, you could say fire extinguishers and fire suppression / alarm systems.
Yeah, fire alarm / suppression systems.
Fire alarm / suppression.
Sprinkler systems, there's plumbers going out there just doing flow testing on sprinkler systems. They're not certified.
Right, well, this would take care of that.
So we're changing the title to something along the lines of certification for individuals who install and service fire extinguishers and fire alarm / suppressant systems, or suppression systems.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Sounds good.
That's good.
Okay. Recommendation 20.
And then under issue, you would have to include on the last line, installed fire alarm / suppression systems.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Recommendation 26. This was a new topic that came up and was added at the September meeting regarding the right to know law.
A question on that one, was that recommendation specific to volunteer fire and EMS agencies or combination?
The notes that I had, it was specific to volunteer.
Okay, that would exclude any of the combination agencies that aren't government-based.
That's what the vote was, so.
My only question on it is, if the local government is responsible to provide the fire EMS, and like in our ordinances, we state who they are, how do we not abide by the right to know law?
There is case law on the definition of agency with regards to the right to know law, because there have been fire inquiries for standalone fire agencies, even though they're providing a government function, they're not a government agency.
It comes down to your corporate status, whether you're a combination or not. So if you're a volunteer, in this case 501c3, privately chartered, you're captured depending on what county you're in, because there have been county judges who have ruled that you are not a local agency as defined under the Act.
Right.
But then the Right to Know office comes around and changes that anyway. Until the Commonwealth Court rules, we're going to have a hodgepodge. But in the case of the career, it's a municipality's responsibility to respond to a Right to Know request. You're not exempt under the Act. But because of the local agency definition and the judge's ruling and the Right to Know law or office, that's how they're capturing volunteer firefighters, only because they receive money sometimes from government.
Right. I follow what you're saying. My contention is we're a 501c3. My agency's a 501c3, but we have employees. On this recommendation, we would not be exempted.
If you're 501c3, the intent under the original bill that we had, which was former Representative Matt Baker, it exempted the volunteer service because we cannot exempt the municipal service.
I understand, but there's also an in-between. There's a municipal level and there's a volunteer, but there's also a non-municipal that has employees.
But what's their status? What's their corporate status? Their corporate filing is what matters.
For nonprofits, 501c3.
There's a difference. Nonprofit is different than charitable. Charitable is an IRS exemption. That's 501c3.
Right.
Our agency is a 501c3 , but we have employees, so we have career personnel, but we are not government-based.
But there's also, yeah, I understand, but there's also employees in a nonprofit EMS company as well.
That's
so
what
it comes down to whether you're government-owned or you're 501c3 of some status.
Correct, but
Yes.
this recommendation discusses volunteer. It doesn't say 501c3, it doesn't say nonprofit, it doesn't say private standalone, it says volunteer specifically.
Well, for the purpose of this report, if we can clarify that, but when it comes to amending the Right to Know law, we just clearly spell out that the volunteer service, which is 501c, as filed with the Department of State.
So, because here I am as the career chief of 7 volunteer fire companies, and if I get a right to know about those fire companies, what do? I'm the municipal chief that gives monies to the local volunteer fire companies.
What are you, does the municipality control you or not? Are you a volunteer, privately chartered nonprofit fire company, or are you a municipal fire department?
They are a privately chartered fire company, but in the ordinance of the municipality, we state that these 7 fire companies provide fire service to the...
That's correct, but that's only because they're abiding by the law, which requires them to name, and they're doing so by ordinance, to name who their coverage is, who's going to provide their coverage. That doesn't make them municipally owned. It only says that you're being funded by them. But that's what's capturing you under the Right to Know with the Right to Know office, is because you're getting
I'm caught
money.
in the middle here. You know, I mean, if I get a right to know as a local government, what do?
If you get a right to know under the current situation, it shouldn't be you who's handling that. It should be the municipality's right to know officer who's okay. Well, then that, and that's what we're trying to stop.
I'm a municipal fire chief in a combination fire service, where we have career personnel who are municipal employees, and then we have 7 volunteer fire companies.
Mm-hmm. And
now I understand if it goes to maybe to the individual fire company, this would apply, but if it comes to me as a government employee, I have to abide by that law. And what if it's about one of those fire companies?
Yeah, you have to do what the municipality tells you because they named you as such, and the right to know law recognizes you as the officer, which is why the legislation is needed in order to put a stop to that. But again, if I may remind everybody, the whole purpose of why we want to exempt the volunteer service is because, number one, they're volunteer. They shouldn't be going through all that paperwork with the right to know request. And number two, if they receive money from a municipality, it should be the municipality's responsibility to show how that money was spent under a right to know request. So the request should be given to the municipality and not the volunteer service. That's the intent.
Sean, I agree with what you're saying. What I think I'm confused is you I think, are using 501c3, which is the IRS tax, charitable organization determination, and volunteer as the same, which are not the same. Again, our organization is a 501c3. We do have volunteers, however, we also have career. This recommendation is very specific to volunteer, not to 501c3.
Right. And again, I go back to what I said. We use volunteer in a general sense, but that's who we refer to is your status, your filing status with the Department of State, whether you're recognized as a private company or municipally owned.
That's exactly my point, and that's why the recommendation needs to be probably adjusted.
Okay, let me just say something here. I've listened to the arguments, and I can see the problem is that because we have not addressed the issues with the fire issues over the years, and EMS is somewhat new compared to firefighting, because it goes way back, and it's evolved over the years. But we got to a point where funding, manpower took years to develop that way. EMS comes in, they're new, we throw all these responsibilities, certifications, everything on them. They had to grow very quickly, but now they're going through the same situation that we saw in the volunteer fire situation, where they can't keep people for certain reasons. So we have a discussion here going on about, okay, when you're one of those unique things that, if you went back 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't think of this volunteer fire company's got to pay to have a driver during the day because they can't get anybody. All of a sudden we have that. So now we have a paid what? Employee? So let me ask Pat, on something like this, to get clarification on this, we have two discussions here, and I don't know if anybody else sitting here has a similar situation. But if each of you could spell out your situations, is it possible that, how soon would you need this back for clarification to get this ready for November's meeting?
Well, first we need to know when we're having the meeting in November.
Well,
and then I can back up from there. But what I would say regarding this particular issue, it came up new at the September 19th meeting. There was nothing in writing. There was just a discussion and a vote taken. So this language is based on a brief discussion and the vote. If you want to work together and come up with a rewrite of this and
What
get
if
it to me
under the resolution where it says to exempt volunteer fire and EMS from its requirement, between the EMS and from, in parentheses, you just put 501c3?
Or any non-government based, any non-government.
Well, I guess my suggestion was going to be, when it comes to right to know, there's a whole process you go through, but then there's one person up there who makes that decision. So I'm wondering if we have two scenarios, 3 or 4, put it down what your situation is, and we go to the right to know person, call them in and say, if we wanted to protect this legally, can we do it by the law now? And if we can, what would the proper verbiage be, so if it came before you, you would have a clear understanding of what we're trying to accomplish here.
And Senator, I think that's fine. I just think in terms of the current language, if we leave that go forward, it clearly states our intent. When, the legislation's probably not going to be one paragraph only. When the legislation
not only
gets
that, I
written,
have to
then we
tell
can
you,
address specifics.
when this legislation is drawn up on any of these recommendations, some may follow it fairly much to the T. But it doesn't necessarily mean that when that legislation is written up, it's going to be exactly what's written here. It's going to be different in certain circumstances. But just because we're having a conversation here, we have to make a decision. Either we're going to take it the way it is, we're going to add some little thing like the 501c3 language, or other, how did you say that? Non-government entity, or is that how you're doing it? We could just do that and then accept that, and then when the legislation is drawn up, at that time, there's going to be a lot of people looking at it, and it can be worded accordingly. So we can do that. So if we need to protect everybody, I don't know if we add a couple pieces of language like you're talking about to kind of protect your situation, it would be in there. That would clearly show what the intent is in the future. But if when the legislation is drawn up, people are going to look at it and say, that might have been the intent, but that's not going to work. And then the legislation will be drawn up accordingly.
Mr. Chairman, can I
Am I clear? Did I say that right?
Yeah, Sean.
Yeah, I just have a question for clarification for Craig. Does your ambulance company qualify for the grant program?
Yes.
Okay. When we drafted the legislation, we said that you are exempt if you're defined under Title 35 for the grant program. So there's no question about it. Now, I know we include career in the grant program now, so there's no need to exempt them. So would that be satisfactory enough under that definition?
In my mind, we've talked about the way things are referenced in this process and being very specific and other recommendations, so things aren't excluded. What alerted me in this recommendation was it was specific to volunteer. And we've talked about career, we've talked about combination, we have municipal base, we have all these different types of structures throughout the Commonwealth. And this recommendation, which may be based on the vote, I don't remember exactly what the vote was or what the motion was last month, is specific to volunteer, not anything career, not anything combination. I certainly get the municipal based, and I understand what 501c3, 501c4 are. But in my mind, in my reading and my intimate knowledge of the right to know law, by having dealt with it, the intention is for the government agencies. The definition of agency has been somewhat hazy, and I've seen different counties have done different determinations. I have a determination from a right to know request made to our 501c3 standalone combination agency that we denied it, not even having a right to know officer because we're not required to have one, and the Commonwealth actually did back us up upon appeal. So I think there's some subjectivity in the right to know office as is. If we're going to make a recommendation to be specific to volunteer, I just want to make sure that it also includes agencies such as mine that are combination, or even all career agencies that aren't part of a government, specific government employees that aren't part of the government structure, although they're providing, quote, a government function.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, this will be handled when we draft the legislation, of course, and then we'll have that opportunity, because chances are it's going to come back to this committee, and we'll have that opportunity then to, really, carve out the details in it. Okay, but I think right now it's a recommendation, and I think we have a lot of flexibility in there in how we draft it.
Are we going to add the parenthetical non-government entity? Is that?
I just wanted to add one thing that I've run into before with this. I've sat on the FEMA Grant Criteria Committee for about 15 years now, where we establish the criteria that all FEMA grants are issued on, and we have standardized language to be 501c or municipal in order to grant funding through the various FEMA grant programs. So just as you're moving forward, it might be something you want to consider in the language. I just offer that as a parenthetical comment.
And one comment from the municipal side. Look, I get what you're trying to do to help organizations without paid staff, what the intent is for here. But there are nonprofit EMS agencies across this Commonwealth that have dozens of employees, far greater than I have as a municipal operator. I have one office manager who doesn't have enough time in the day to do her stuff also. So I get it if it's for a small organization that you really want to help out, but there are multiple nonprofit agencies across this Commonwealth that have literally dozens of employees. So if they're going to be exempt, I want to be exempt too, because I don't have the staff either to do this. I'm not Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or Erie or Scranton, a small municipal operation. That I get the right to know because I deal with them all the time, and it's labor intensive to do them. But what we're saying here, organizations without paid staff, these nonprofits, they have paid staff. So that's just my 2 cents worth.
Just as a note, the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee did a report on the cost of the right to know law on state agencies, local agencies, the legislature, exactly, released this past winter. And there's no guarantee that any recommendation related to the right to know law is going to actually move forward. There have been bills pending over the last few years. The law just had its 10th year anniversary. it's a good idea to get it out there and get it in front of folks, but trust me, loads of folks want exemptions, and so far there has been a real effort not to continue to exempt other entities from it. So for what that's worth, I think the language here at least gets it in front of the legislature as something they should consider when, like for example, if they're looking at the right to know law, which I expect they would be doing again, since legislation I think has been introduced every session since they passed the law. But for what that's worth. But I think we can work with what we have here with that, maybe the adjustment of non-government entity for now.
Well, is there anybody has any objection to that by adding that phrase in there? Look, the thing about the right to know law, Pat's right. That was a real work in progress, that right to know law. And there was a lot of back and forth discussions and arguments and dissensions and all kind of things in that. And usually when they get a piece of legislation like that done, there's no real appetite to go and open up the floodgates, so to speak. And so that's one of the issues you have there. But it is one of these recommendations that's important, especially like we say to some of these small organizations, that you can send them an email. I send emails to some of my fire departments, and I get no response because there's nobody going in there. There's maybe one person supposed to check them. They may not get in that fire station for a long time, and you get no response from anybody. And so that's the area we're in. So I don't, personally, if it makes some people feel better about this, I don't mind it in the recommendation because, like I said, in the end, it's going to be on the legislation that's drawn up. Steve, you have any? Okay?
Okay.
All right.
But and this, again, I'm just asking a question here. Since here we talk about volunteer fire and EMS with the parenthetical non-government, would we retain that language or would we just have first responders paren non-government? Okay. So this is a retain both. And that's, I may be, as I work on this, trying to get that understanding of where we want it to be first responder and where we may need it to be this specific. So we're at the final recommendation, and that's recommendation 27, and it's the prior regulations in codes 3, and this has to do with continuing to include the emergency service stakeholders in ongoing efforts to make adjustments to those services with whatever the General Assembly does. And it's, I think, a really nice way to end the series of recommendations by acknowledging that there's going to be continued movement here. And to have that continued movement, though, you have to have the continued involvement of the experts. So that takes us through the recommendations, and I'd also like to walk you through the appendices. So the first appendix, which you have a copy of, is statutory responsibilities by form of government. This has also been has additional information from the last time. It includes incorporated towns. That is language that was provided to us by the Local Government Commission, and we took their language and then formatted into this appendix. So it's just direct language from the statutes. The next appendix, which you do not have, is Appendix 2. And Appendix 2 is Municipal Fire / EMS Service Delivery Chart. We're waiting for that to be finalized and sent to us. That was in the, if you look at the old SR6 report, 60, sorry, the SR60 report, we're just looking to update that, and we're just waiting to have that finalized.
Pat, those recommendations are in an early recommendation, or that chart under service delivery? That's the second, standard of cover. Is it standard of cover and service delivery the same thing, I guess is my question. I think it is.
Okay.
And the standard of cover chart is there.
It's on page 22.
That was just less amount of standard of cover, short there.
Right.
So we can delete Appendix 2 if you like, since we already have the information in there.
That's my recommendation.
Is that okay? Okay. Appendix 3 is legislative accomplishments pertaining to emergency responders, and that covers the years 1995 through 2016. Yep. Yep.
Can we, did you say, can we include 17 and 18? Nate, I didn't hear what you had said.
What's that?
Can we include 17 and 18?
That we will. That's
Okay,
later.
now
That's a
the
different
session's
appendix.
complete.
You're jumping ahead of us.
I'm sorry.
Okay. The current Appendix 4, but now going to be the new Appendix 3, is the status of Senate Resolution 60 recommendations. And that is that included in the copy today? Yes. Okay. So that just lets the readers know what was recommended in Senate Resolution 60, what had been adopted since then, and what was still outstanding. And there's a statement made in the executive summary that indicates that part of the recommendations here includes not only the recommendations that are specifically enumerated, the 27 that we discussed, but also a recommendation to move forward to make those changes that were suggested by the SR 60 Commission that had not been made to date.
Under the first recommendation, you have a status complete with 2 question marks. So I don't know.
Where are you?
Page 2 of that appendix.
Of Appendix 4 here?
Appendix 4, the second page. Recommendation 1.
That's what was,
Yeah.
I don't know.
John, do you want to speak to this? On Appendix 4, page 2, it has a complete question mark.
They were questions on whether it was actually done. There had been laws passed, but whether they were effective or not.
Effective or not.
And so the question mark is that there was action taken, but the action solved the problem. And, you know, I left that up for other people to determine. I certainly have an opinion, and the answer is no, but that's what the question marks are for.
You left that date to...
The next to the last line, there's Act 7, Act 8, Act 9, Act 31, right?
30-something, third-class city code, yeah.
I can't get the action started. It's not complete.
Complete without funding.
Leave it at that.
I'm going to start asking for clarification. Are we going to try to do something on page 2?
Frankly, Pat, I think I did that as a working document for the very first session, so people had an indication on where we were. I don't even know if it needs to be, you know, needs to be included. That's up to everybody else. But I think that the purpose was, I mean, we have the laws that are there.
Our committee had originally asked for what was completed, what wasn't completed from SR 60, and then Don, you got that for us, I know,
Yeah.
and that's how that came about.
The original intent, as I recall, was to get legislation passed that would make this consistent across the board and to give a framework for municipalities to work within. Implementation was a whole nother issue. So from an intent of completing the recommendation, I think it was completed with what we had asked for in 2004. But did it solve the problem? No.
The question here is whether we want to include the PFESI report here, the update, in this as an appendix or not. I think it's helpful information to have. If you guys don't think it's necessary, by all means, let us know. But
I think it's helpful.
Okay.
It's Acts 7, 8, 9, and 31 at the bottom of that.
you're just going to amend that? Or?
Well, I don't have a word.
Right, we'll have to see if we can get a Word document from Don.
We were unable to.
Don, do you have that in a Word document that you can send to us?
Probably.
We'll expect that we'll expect an email here this afternoon then hear from Don with it.
The answer is yes. Is it retrievable? Is where the question mark comes in, but I'll look.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Okay.
Take the PDF.
No, it was simply, it was produced by.
Okay, so the idea is we're going to get the Word document, we're going to add the Act 31. Do you want to delete the question marks next to complete or not?
We could,
Okay.
yeah, we could change those to ineffective or something else. I think it's important to note that just because the legislation was passed, it's not working. So whatever we want to choose to.
Well, the status is the recommendation was enacted. The legislature did go forward with it. I think Bill's comment about didn't necessarily mean each individual entity went forward and did what they needed to do. So I think it was a complete legislative action.
Well, okay, that's fine. We can just get rid of the question marks where they're.
Okay. So.
I think the recommendation was complete, and the issues of implementation have been prior mentioned across the recommendations of the SR6 report.
Yeah.
So I think it shows that natural connection.
It's complete, but ongoing efforts needed.
Right.
It always will be. When getting local governments and the fire and EMS departments to work together, and that's an ongoing process.
And really, I think the reason to include the document is to make a reader who was not familiar with the SR 60 report at least familiar with what happened at that time, and if they want to go back and see what was that recommendation and why is the recommendation in the current report still necessary. The next, which is the current Appendix 5, will be the new Appendix 4, is Don, the more recent legislative action. So this is actions that were taken in the current legislative session.
Some of these include statements about to be introduced at this point. We say that that's not going to happen.
We can revise it. There's still time. Yeah.
And then Appendix 6, which will be 5, is reports and references, and that includes citations for the reports that various of the subcommittees referenced in their committee work, and statutes and policies, again, that were referenced in the committee's work. And if there are others that we didn't catch, let me know, and we can certainly add them to them, but those are the ones we have there now, so if you have more though, please let me know. And then the final appendix, which is current 7 but will be 6, is a reiteration of the votes that were taken on the recommendations on September 19th. Any questions on any of the appendices? Any willingness to volunteer to rewrite titles of recommendations? Yay, okay. Then I turn this back over to Chairman Balakovich.
Okay, on, Pat, I think the way you conducted this, I don't know that we have to do any action items, right? I think we're fine there, and we've gone through everything. I would say this, that some of you probably have not got time to really digest this. I would ask each of you to go through it, see if there's any typo errors that we need to correct. Those of you who brought certain things up when it comes to first responders being used instead of fire EMS, if you find something there, if you highlight it to make sure that it's proper. I would think most places we can use first responders. The right to know part, though, I think we said we would keep it fire.
Recommendations that are specific to EMS, for example, we'll use EMS rather than first responders or firefighter if that's appropriate.
Okay. Any general comments by anybody as far as the prepared report goes? Any last thoughts? Okay. Yes.
I'm not sure where it's appropriate to talk about this, but I've talked to a few other members. I think the need to keep this group together in some fashion, whether it's a subcommittee that lives in the fire commissioner's office or the EMS bureau or wherever, so that we can meet twice a year or whatever, sort of monitor progress and update things where they're needed. We've worked well together, and I don't know if that needs to be formalized or how we need to do that, but I just wanted to say that.
I don't know, Steve, how did we, sometimes things just happen, but when we did the 911 legislation, which was Representative Barrar's, we have a very active, engaged commission with the 911. We meet regularly over at Pima. It's amazing that that energy is still there and that devotion to that committee. We have large turnouts of people. So we've kept them there engaged because we have flexibility in the law that we've changed some things that weren't thought of. And we still have those people sitting in the background who listen to us say what we think and sometimes what we think we know, and we really don't know. And then it's brought up to you by those individuals out there who have their expertise in different areas. I personally I won't be here for the continuation of this. I don't know, Steve, if you have some thoughts on I think personally my whole vision was that we would stick together on these things and continue this process that we have here.
Yeah, I think the suggestion is great, as I think the committee chairmen have that authority to keep this commission together and to meet on a regular basis. I think the important thing going forward is this legislation gets introduced and it's getting it out of committee is not going to be a problem. Okay, it's getting our leadership to run it, and that's where I think the committee, the lobbying efforts from this committee to go to, when we need you to go to our leadership, and we can't allow what happened with the transport bill to happen to go and sit in it passes the House or the Senate, then it sits for 6 years in somebody's committee because they need someone to sign off. We need you to lobby for it. We can push it so far, but it's a little difficult for me to really twist the arm of whoever the senator is and say, look, I want you to run our agenda. It's got to be his agenda or his or hers agenda too. So yeah, I think the idea of getting together twice a year is a good thing.
Do we maybe get our staff to prepare some type of letter with intent that we as chairman are looking forward to this body staying together and meeting periodically to address.
How would we do that? Through the leader, get the leadership to sign off on it, or we really don't need that, do we? The commission is set. I don't think we.
Yeah.
Right. What would dissolve this commission? I mean, we formed this commission. There's nothing in the resolution that formed it to dissolve it, is there?
I don't.
Well, when the report's issued, the mission has been accomplished of the commission. But the chairman of the committee, the House and Senate committee, they can keep a group together, advisory. And that's what we did for the 911. We have a 911 advisory, key stakeholders, and we routinely will meet with them on a multitude of issues. The chairman could keep that together. The group of key component people, stakeholder groups, just like we do for various other issues we have.
Right. We have a volunteer, or we have a firefighters caucus that is a voluntary for the representatives to join. There's no legislation that established that. It's just a group of people, and we should probably give them a seat here too.
I agree.
As we get together, put them on the commission to meet with us as a basically, I think it's got to be a recommendation, a body that's going to recommend, but also to lobby for the things that we need done. Every one of you have a state rep and a state senator. Your voice has to be important to your representatives. So, your job to lobby them is I think, very important.
Yeah, and it would be an informal stakeholder group. It would not be organized as we do now with the expenses and so on.
We can't get paid for it?
It has to be authorized by resolution. I think it's important that we, as Don mentioned, because otherwise, this is going to go the way of the six other, going back to 1975 of Pennsylvania burning. It's going to sit on the shelf unless we push it, and I don't think any of us mind coming up here or meeting somewhere.
Well, one thing that hasn't been discussed that I don't know Randy's thoughts on it, but early on in the next session, and I think we as legislators need to talk about it, is whether we want to do a special session to address a lot of these issues. I think, the special session doesn't buy a whole lot, except it gives you a whole lot of publicity. It draws attention, I think, from the public out there, because you do get a little bit more press and coverage for it under that circumstances. Does it create a atmosphere that these issues are a top priority for the legislature? I would hope so. But we all know how important these issues are. But I can guarantee our other representatives are dealing with 15, 20 other issues on top of the issues that we're dealing with here. So I think to make sure that this is, people understand the importance of this and the priority, I think we have to have that discussion early on. And that might be a good reason for us all to get together, maybe early in the legislative session, sometime maybe around March or so, to see, during the budget hearings. And that would be the time to try to put this together and come back and have a voluntary organizational meeting.
Just in support of that, I remember we had our SR-60 reboot at Pima headquarters. And Chief Delaney mentioned this earlier on, I'm going to reiterate this, is that the room was separated. That career was on one side, fire volunteer was on the other side, EMS was sitting somewhere else, and everybody was separated because that's where they were comfortable. Ever since that meeting, and we have moved forward, we have been one organized group. So we have to keep this group together in some fashion, because we're the experts that have put this document together as an organized, united group. So as we keep moving forward and we move forward with legislation to make us successful, we have to we can't reinvent the wheel again. So I'm sure that is hopefully the census sitting here today, but I just wanted to reinforce that, we've come a long way, and there's been a lot of big change, that we're a united group now instead of everybody separated.
I think when what is it, the 38,000 number comes out, I think that's pretty eye-opening. I would have never thought that I would have seen that number that low. So that kind of counts. So I think, you know, if we can get our other members to take that seriously, these issues seriously, they'll understand why we have to push these issues. So.
I think, look, the only way that you'll get this done so it doesn't, you know, go on the shelf and collect the dust and just have people give you lip service, you got to stay engaged. You have more clout than you realize. Look, going back quite a few years ago, the fire companies, like in my district, or my hometown, they had a lot of members. They made sure that their immediate family and their extended family and their neighbors were all involved, and they spoke at one force. And on the local level, when those guys got together, those local councilmen or commissioners, they listened to what they said. Because quite honestly, there was a lot of votes. You need to get that back. I'll tell you, I got a lot done when I was here, but I leave with a lot of disappointment that we didn't get more done. And I have to take part of the blame for that. But that being said, life goes on, and your participation is going to go on. You got to stick together and maintain that communication between all of you. And maybe you do through a round table and keep evolving, but you get a couple people that are on the same page. Make sure you're all on the same page when you stick together, and you have a couple people maybe you pick as not that all of you can't call and speak, but maybe a couple of you assume that leadership role where if you have to come to Harrisburg for something, you have those groups speaking, those people speaking on your behalf, because you won't all be able to get here the same day. You all know that. So you need a couple people that can maybe commit to that. Engage your family and your neighbors, and the message should be, this is your time. This is your time to get these things done and be tired of the lip service. And your reps and your senators need to know. Our leadership needs to know. You know, I can't tell you how mad I am about that fireworks tax. I cannot begin to tell you how mad I was. And no discussion was made with me whatsoever, and it was other people's bill, but I went to try to promote that, to start putting those dollars into what we need to do for fire and EMS. Yes, we had a bad situation with the budget, but I just didn't agree with it. That money has to start coming back into what it was meant to do to help our fire and EMS. And that is something that I intended to work on very hard over in my my side of the aisle over here. But got to keep this going. I can tell you with 911, it's working out really well. It really is. It was a great piece of legislation. We're taking afterthoughts into account, but we realize just how very, very important it is. And the report just came out. Well, I don't know if it just came out, but I just read it. The one from the federal government on the 911 and the status. And I think we're in really good shape in the state of Pennsylvania. I really do. So please stay together, stay the course, keep this camaraderie between all of you. Don't get separated again to career and volunteer and EMS and fire over here. Stay together, strengthen numbers, let your message be known. It is your time. and that's what we need to do here. So stay engaged with each other, and I think with Representative Barrar, I'm pretty confident he'll be here, and he's got a bigger history than I do in this, you know, and whoever takes over in the Senate, keep this relationship going that we have between the House and the Senate, and get things done. I don't care if it's Democrat, Republican, I don't care if it's House or Senate, get the damn job done. And do you think do the right thing the right way for the right reasons. So with that, is there anybody who has anything to add about the report? Okay, what I would like to now, Pat, we have to give you time to do the work that you have to do. So if you would let us know approximate time to finish what you need so we can get some dates out there for the people to come back.
I guess I would ask if, after you have an opportunity to read the whole report, if you could get comments to me. I'm going to have to say by the end of the month, which is next Wednesday, I'll move forward in making the edits that we talked about today. And the folks who have already said they were going to provide information, please do so. So if that all happens, I should be able to turn something around by the end of next week. Maybe the day after, if it doesn't get done, then maybe the day after Election Day. So anytime after that, I think we'd be good. And I'm going to look at Rick and Nate, too, about if that works for you and Sean and Mike.
Yeah, I think for me, because I will be in Florida after election for probably 2 weeks.
Okay.
So
Go on Key West.
probably work best for me would be that very last week of November, the whole week open.
Okay.
The majority of the people in the room. Now, remember, our authority as a legislature ends December 1st, but, you know, I can't imagine we'd want to meet in December anyway. So, you know. All right.
Yeah, because one thing for sure, I'm done.
Yeah. Part of me envies you. Believe me.
I know, I hear it from everybody.
Well, then to give people a little more time, I'll push that to, if comments can get to me by the end of next week.
Yeah.
And then that'll give a good 2 weeks
That gives
to
you
make
plenty of
edits,
time
and then we
then
should be fine.
If we do it at the end of November, would probably be better because it gives you all the time in the world then.
All the time in the world,
Well,
really.
kind of.
Another 5 days.
A lot more time.
Sure?
No, that sounds good.
For now.
We just want to be cognizant on how late we go. You never know. Something comes up, and then we got the Thanksgiving coming up. So, but you can work with the staff.
Sure.
They'll know Steve's agenda and mine. I'll accommodate any way, you know, I have to. Okay, anything else?
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Representative.
Okay.
Thank you, Pat.
Yep.
Good job.
Thank you, Rich. Okay. And Pat, thank you for all your work, subcommittees, and everybody here. And we'll call this hearing to an end until we meet again.